A reading from the Gospel of Mark, the 4th chapter, verses 30 to 32. And this is a paraphrased reading from the Message Bible that Carrie mentioned just a bit earlier. How can we picture God's realm? What kind of story can we use? It's like a pine nut. When it lands on the ground, it's quite small as seeds go. Yet once it is planted, it grows into a huge pine tree with thick, shading branches. Why, eagles nest in it. People, may we be blessed in the hearing of this simple parable of Jesus. May it speak to us in our minds and our hearts and our lives this day as something of God's own word and wisdom. Amen.
Recording in progress.
I think that it has always been mainly parables and dreams that have sustained me, that have kept me hopeful through thick and thin. My parents, when they were young, were Depression-era New Deal dreamers. Both of them were among the first in their families of origin to graduate from college. They taught school together for over a decade in rural Southern California one-room schoolhouses. During these happy earliest married years, their first child, my oldest sister, Peggy, was born, my parents' dream child. Before long, though, Dad's wider world vocational dream got deferred. His hearing loss made it impossible for him to effectively continue teaching. So he bought 10 acres of irrigatable land in the North Okanagan and became an apple orchardist. He built the house that I was raised in. A new dream started to get realized, and Mom continued to teach second grade. And then came the pandemic that was polio, which hit my sister Peggy brutally. She died just before the time that the Salk vaccine became available, and just a few days prior to her 15th birthday. The grief of my parents for the loss of their brilliant, beautiful firstborn was immense. My other older siblings were greatly impacted too. I was still a 9-month-old baby, so the effects of Peggy's death on me were less direct. But dreams of my parents had been and would continue to get battered and beaten down more than I knew. It wasn't until close to the end of my mother's life that I learned that she had also endured the loss of another daughter named Susan, who was stillborn. And Mom silently endured 2 additional miscarriages as well. In those days, one didn't talk about such things. Today, nearly 3/4 of a century later, and after over half a century of judicial precedent saying otherwise, Roe v. Wade has gotten overturned. And frankly, I shudder to imagine how many young pregnant women won't survive, and how in Texas or Kentucky or even Idaho, had my own mother been there as a young pregnant woman today, she could well have died too. Or for helping her survive her miscarriages, her doctor could have been arrested, with the state calling her miscarriages illegal abortions. At a much later period in my own life, close friends of mine suffered terribly and died of AIDS. One of these was my friend Angel from Castañar, Puerto Rico, who, like me, was originally going to become a Church of the Brethren minister, ordained minister, but who realized, as did I at the time, that being gay in that faith tradition made it nearly impossible to fulfill that dream. I speak rather frankly and freely of my own and my family of origin's own story of thwarted dreams and miscarriages because I want others to always feel they can do the same. One of several things I've always respected a great deal about you, about this particular small but mighty congregation, is that you value being real and staying real. Individually and collectively, St. Paul's UCC has a history of speaking with candor about your family secrets, your struggles, your losses, and your addictions. In other words, you're brave enough and strong enough to be vulnerable together. You don't hold in your grief like my mother was once told she must. Of course, every family that has lived long upon this earth has endured tragedy or trauma of one kind or another. You all know and have experienced more than a few dreams deferred of your own, dreams, if you will, miscarriaged. There are private and personal miscarriages, babies not born, sure, but also dashed hopes in having to live alone after a divorce, or the too early frost of a spouse's premature death. One could say that there are vocational miscarriages, getting laid off or fired from one's favorite job in life, or a failure at school somehow, or dead ends instead of new opportunities along the life journey, or unconquerably discriminatory barriers. And yes, certainly wider societal miscarriages, fatigue and burnout in the struggle for a just peace. At best, a questionable environmental sustainability for our children's children. Blatant lies and deceptions on social media, centuries-long racial injustice. What happens when a dream gets so unrelentingly beaten down? What happens to a dream deferred? Asked the Black gay poet Langston Hughes. Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun? Or fester like a sore and then run? Or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load. Or does it explode? Good questions, Langston. Each of these results and more. I'm afraid I'm actually not much of an optimist, but people, I am a person of hope. I make that distinction. And it is parables and dreams that have long sustained me. Now, I also confess to having an unfair share of white male privilege. I am one of those aging baby boomers who recently was quite surprised to see mostly millennial Black Lives Matter supporters exploding into the streets in considerable numbers, even in small cities and towns of America. I thought that I cared all along about racism. But honestly, it had barely registered how long and how much the fervent dreams of Black people have been shattered, deferred, denied by slavery, by Jim Crow laws, by redlining, by an unjust system that still today puts more young Black men in prison than in college. I have a dream. We know that part of King's most famous speech. But come on, God, will the dream keep getting gunned down forever? Forgotten, dried up, festering, or sagging, sugar-coated and impotent? Or will something else take place? Something far more hopeful. I see up and coming generations exploding into the streets with a renewed passion for justice, and I get inspired. I keep believing. Maybe I'm crazy. But even amid this seemingly never-ending current pandemic, I feel a renewed sense of hope. Not all the time, granted, but sometimes I do. Sometimes we learn from the pressure points in life, and dreams long deferred get realized in a whole different form than we expected. You know the familiar saying about how all of us break, but some of us get stronger at the broken places. Easier said than done, granted. I don't believe that God wills that we endure suffering or injustice, but to the extent that we must, let's keep looking for ways together to make such times instructive. I've learned so much in the past few years alone about viruses, about racism, about a woman's need, not only her right to have choices. May there be an explosion of compassion, says Ravi Chandra, evaporating the walls of self-centeredness that reign so supreme in far too many places of privilege and power today. May we soon more fully emerge from hard times, having discovered that our shared vulnerability can be for us a strength, not a weakness. May our dreams not dry up and fester, but may we repeatedly reawaken as from a long sleep. I, for one, am literally dreaming like I haven't in decades. Dreams so real that I reckon if enough of us have them, they'll actually sustain whole nations and forests and faith communities. Small but mighty, St. Paul's. Please keep telling, hearing, believing those good parables of Jesus. I believe God will yet use your modest mustard seed faith. Call it pine nut faith, if you wish, and make of it something that sprouts and flowers and grows beautifully, even becoming a mighty tree with shade to help shelter, producing food, spiritual nourishment too, that will help feed the masses. And people, may we know it repeatedly, again and again, and eternally to be exactly so. Amen. Now, it would be actually a great favor to me, and I hope to all of you or one another to hear from you. Maybe you'll give me a little feedback. haven't done this kind of a sermon before, you might even want to tell of a miscarriage or some other disappointment in your life. Or maybe you'll want to share a way that your dreams are exploding into realization even now in some new form. What say ye?
Recording stopped.